Hello and welcome to another ideaSPACE craft along with the Public Library of Brookline. My name is Christy and I'm a reference and technology librarian at the Brookline Village Library, and I'm here today in our ideaSPACE to show you all how to make your very own woven wall hanging. Let's get started. Is this your first Public Library of Brookline to go program? Here's how it works. Each month the library is offering new take-home program kits, complete with everything you need to follow along and video or written instructions created by one of your local librarians. The best part? Absolutely no due dates. You can keep everything included in your kit. Visit brklib.com/to-go for a full list of our current kit offerings. Then come by any Brookline Library location the second Monday of every month to pick up your kit while supplies last. Now let's get crafting. Today's project will take most makers about 3 to 5 hours to complete. Here's what you'll find inside this month's kit. 1 cardboard loom and length of warp thread, 3 colors yarn, 1 6-inch wooden dowel, and 1 plastic darning needle. From home, you'll also need a pair of scissors and some masking or office tape. Take a moment to gather your materials and then we'll get started. To get started, we're going to prepare our loom for weaving by setting the warp, the vertical threads that act as the foundation for the horizontal weft threads. Unwrap the warp thread from your loom and set it nearby. Now pick up your cardboard loom and gently separate the notches on each end. This will make the threading a lot easier in a minute. Once you've separated the notches, tie your warp thread around the top left notch on your loom, leaving a 2 to 3 inch tail. Now bring the warp thread down to the bottom of the loom and wrap it around the second notch from the side to form a line parallel to the left edge of the loom. Repeat this process all the way down the length of the loom until it's covered in parallel lines of thread. Double check that you've only wrapped the thread around the notches in your loom and not all the way around the back side. Then tie the warp thread to the final notch, trim the end, and save your leftover thread for later. Now, get some masking or office tape and tape over about 1 inch of the threads at the bottom of your loom. This will reserve some warp thread for tying off our weaving when we're finished. Once your loom is warped, get your plastic darning needle and choose a color of yarn to start with. Cut yourself about 1 yard of your starting yarn and thread your darning needle. You can either thread your needle normally, or for faster weaving, you can double up your yarn and tie it together like this. We'll be exploring a few different weaving techniques in this video, but to start we're going to try a simple tabby weave. If you ever did paper weaving in school, this is probably the weave you used. Choose a side of your loom to start on and alternate feeding the needle under then over the warp threads until you reach the other side. To ensure the most even tension of your yarn, shape it into an arch as you pull it down to the bottom of your loom, then press down first the center, then the quarter marks, then the rest of the weaving yarn. Be sure to leave a tail of 2 to 3 inches at the start of your weave. Now feed your needle back through the warp threads, this time alternating the opposite threads from your first row. Once again, create an arch with your yarn and press it down in segments. You've just done your first tabby weave. If at any point you run out of yarn, simply leave yourself a 2 to 3 inch tail and pick up with a new piece of yarn. We'll weave in the ends later. If you'd like to add a fringe to the bottom of your weaving, now's a great time to do so. Simply cut pieces of the yarn you'd like to use in your tassels to twice the length you'd like your finished tassel to be. If you'll be using the library's loom, you'll be able to fit 11 tassels in a row, so you'll need 22 pieces of yarn for 2-strand tassels or 33 pieces for 3-strand tassels. Once you've cut your yarn pieces, separate out a set of yarns you'd like to be a tassel and lay them horizontally across the first 2 warp threads from the side of the loom. Then feed the right side ends of the yarn around and under the right side warp thread, and the left side ends of the yarn around and under the left side warp thread. Pull both ends down under the center of the yarn so they catch evenly. Let's take a look at that one more time in a diagram. Starting with your yarn perpendicular to 2 warp threads, Feed each end of the yarns around and under the warp thread closest to them, then pull them down under the horizontal yarn so it catches in a loose knot. If you'd like a whole row of tassels, just repeat this process with the next 2 empty warp threads over until your loom is full. You can do your whole weaving in the tabby stitch, but if you'd like to add some variety, you can also work in shapes, horizontal and vertical stripes, or sumac stitches. Sound like a lot? Take your time with this part of the video and replay and pause it as often as you need to. And remember that a great thing about weaving is that you can undo any mistakes with just a little bit of unweaving. To add shapes to your weaving, begin with a basic tabby weave, but end your row early, leaving space on the edges of your loom. Treat the last thread you use as though it's the end of the loom. If possible, end your row an even number of threads early so that your over-under pattern remains the same in the next row. Here I'm creating a triangle in the center of my design by ending my weave early by 2 threads on each side of each row. To join shapes together, treat the first warp thread in an existing shape as the final warp thread in the row you're joining in, and layer the rows together however looks the most natural. This will mean that there are more strands of yarn on the warp threads that begin and end shapes, but this will become less noticeable as you continue to weave and the yarn compresses further. Want to add a denser mix of colors or textures? Add some stripes. Both horizontal and vertical stripes are created using a variation on tabby stitches. To create horizontal stripes, just weave 2 rows of your first color, followed by 2 rows of your second color, then repeat. To create vertical stripes, weave 1 row of your first color, followed by 1 row of your second color. In both horizontal and vertical stripes, you don't need to trim your yarn at the end of each color. Just rethread your yarn when it's time to use it again. Here's a diagram of each pattern to help you follow along. The last weaving technique we'll try today is called the sumac stitch, and it creates large, loopy, knit-like patterns in your weaving. I'll use a fresh weaving to demonstrate it, so it's a little easier to follow along. To begin a sumac stitch, thread a length of yarn under 2 warp threads, leaving yourself a 2 to 3 inch tail. Next, thread your yarn over the next 2 warp threads to the right, then double back under them both to create a loop around the 2 warp threads. Repeat this step to the end of your row or shape. To begin your second row, wrap the yarn around the final warp threads 1 extra time, then reverse the direction of your loops, feeding the yarn over the next 2 warp threads to the left, then back under them both to the right to create a loop and repeat to the end of the row. Here's a diagram of this stitch for your reference. Mix and match as many or as few of these techniques as you'd like to fill up your loom until about 1 or 2 inches of empty warp thread are left at the top. Now it's time to tie off your weaving. Starting with the top of your weaving, snip the warp threads 2 at a time and tie the ends together into a knot around the last row of your yarn. Next, repeat this process at the bottom of your weaving, untaping and snipping the threads at the bottom of your weaving 2 at a time so you can knot them together without any yarn coming loose. Once your weaving is knotted off, it's finally time to deal with all these loose ends. Use your plastic darning needle to pull any leftover yarn through your weaving to the back side, or hide it in your weaving by weaving it into the existing stitches. If you happen to have a crochet hook at home, they can be especially helpful for pulling the yarn through your weaving in this step. Once all your loose ends are hidden in the back of your weaving, you can trim them a little shorter to debulk the weaving and ensure they stay hidden. If you use tassels in your weaving, now's also a good time to give them a little bit of a haircut. When your weaving looks neat and tidy, it's time to attach your dowel hanger. Thread one more piece of yarn and use it to stitch the wooden dowel in your kit to the top of your weaving. When you reach the end of the weaving, just knot off your yarn and slip the needle back under all your stitches to hide the ends. Now take a few last moments to hide and trim any remaining loose ends, then knot a bit of your leftover warp thread to the ends of the dowel to serve as your hanger. Thank you all so much for crafting with us today. We would love to see what you made with your kit, so please feel free to share your project with us on social media using the hashtag #MakeYourOwnStory. The Craft Along program is generously sponsored by the library trustees and the Friends of the Brookline Public Library. From all of us here at the library, we miss you and wish you very happy making. Bye.